November 21st, 1971. Night. Thick storm clouds roll across the sky over America's Pacific Northwest. Far above the ground, a Boeing 727 cuts through the darkness. The rear stairway is open, and freezing air tears through the cabin. In the aisle stands a man wearing a dark suit. A parachute is strapped tightly to his back. In his hands, an old canvas bag stuffed with cash. His tie flutters wildly in the wind. Without a word, he steps into the black void. The aircraft keeps flying forward as if nothing happened. No one sees where he goes. No one hears a scream. And no one ever sees him alive again. This man will go down in history as D.B. Cooper, the only hijacker in U.S. history to successfully steal a fortune, jump from a plane, and vanish without a trace. His story will become a legend. The FBI will chase him for decades, and they will never find him. But before the jump that made him famous, everything began with an ordinary day at a busy airport. The airport is crowded. Thanksgiving weekend is approaching, and people are rushing to catch their flights. Loudspeaker announcements echo through the terminals. There's the smell of coffee, the sound of luggage wheels, and families saying hurried goodbyes. Amid the crowd, one man looks completely unremarkable. Dark suit, white shirt, sunglasses. He walks calmly toward the Northwest Orient Airlines counter, holding a briefcase. He buys a one-way ticket to Seattle. He pays in cash. The name on the ticket, Dan Cooper. The clerk doesn't think twice. Cash purchases aren't unusual. She doesn't realize this moment is about to spark one of the greatest mysteries in American criminal history. At 2:50 p.m., passengers begin boarding Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a short 30-minute flight to Seattle. There are only 36 passengers and 6 crew members on board. Dan Cooper takes seat 18C near the back of the plane, beside the aisle. He orders a bourbon and soda, lights a cigarette, and sits back quietly. Flight attendants later recall him as calm, polite, and almost unnervingly composed. To everyone else, it's just another routine flight. For Cooper, it's the opening move of a carefully planned operation. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper hands a folded note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. At first, she barely glances at it, assuming it's a phone number from a flirtatious passenger. She slips it into her pocket. Cooper leans closer and says in a low, steady voice, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Florence opens it. The message is typed in neat capital letters. "I have a bomb in my briefcase. I will use it if necessary. I want you to sit next to me. This is a hijacking." Cooper opens his briefcase just enough for her to see inside. She spots red cylinders, wires, and a battery. It looks convincing. Cooper's tone remains eerily calm. He dictates his demands clearly and precisely. $200,000 in cash, in $20 bills. For parachutes, 2 primary and 2 reserve. A fully fueled aircraft ready for immediate departure after landing in Seattle. No tricks, no resistance. If anyone tries anything, he'll blow up the plane. The captain relays the message to air traffic control. The FBI and local authorities scramble into action. Flight 305 begins circling Seattle, buying time while the demands are prepared on the ground. On board, passengers remain blissfully unaware. Some read newspapers. Others nap. A few chat quietly. No one realizes their flight has just been hijacked. Cooper sits calmly, sipping his drink and smoking. His control over the situation is absolute. Meanwhile, on the ground, the FBI races to gather the ransom money. They collect $200,000 in $20 bills, carefully photograph, and record each serial number. If Cooper escapes, this will be their only way to track him. The parachutes come from a local skydiving school. In the rush, one of them is accidentally a training parachute, not suitable for actual jumps. This mistake will later fuel endless debates about Cooper's escape. By the time the plane finally lands in Seattle, night is falling. Passengers are released one by one. Nobody is harmed. Most still don't even know what just happened. On board remain the flight crew and Cooper. The ransom money and parachutes are delivered. Cooper inspects the cash carefully, glancing through the bundles, then checks the parachutes. Finally, he turns to the crew and gives a new order. They're going to Mexico. After receiving the money and parachutes, Cooper becomes completely composed again. His calmness surprises the crew. He doesn't rush. He doesn't yell. He behaves like a man who knows exactly what he's doing, as if he's rehearsed every step. He gives the pilots precise instructions for the next flight. They are to fly south toward Mexico City. The altitude must stay at around 10,000 feet. The speed must not exceed 300 kilometers per hour. The landing gear must remain lowered, and the flaps should be set for takeoff position. Most bizarrely, Cooper insists that the rear stairway remain open during flight. The pilots are stunned. No ordinary passenger should even know these details, let alone issue such instructions with confidence. Cooper's knowledge impresses even the FBI listening in from the ground. Whoever he is, he's not improvising. Outside, the weather starts to worsen. Clouds thicken, and a cold rain begins to fall. The pilots explain that the plane doesn't have enough fuel to reach Mexico in one flight. They will need to make a stop in Reno, Nevada, to refuel. Cooper doesn't hesitate. He agrees immediately. Not a single sign of panic. Not a single wasted movement. He refuses any additional personnel on board, rejecting the idea of a flight engineer or navigator. It's as if he's thought through every scenario and knows exactly how to control the situation. The Boeing 727 takes off again into the dark, rainy sky. The only people left on board are the pilots, one flight attendant, and Cooper. Unknown to Cooper, military aircraft have already been scrambled. Several fighter jets follow the plane from a distance, tracking its path without lights, hidden in the darkness. Cooper instructs the crew to stay inside the cockpit. He moves to the rear of the plane with the parachutes and the bag of money. He turns off the cabin lights. No one can see what he's doing. All the crew hears is the roar of the engines, the whistle of the wind, and occasional footsteps coming from the back. Around 8 p.m., one of the pilots notices a sudden pressure change in the cabin. Moments later, the plane tilts slightly. Something has changed. It's the rear stairway. Cooper has lowered it himself. The pilots exchange uneasy glances. No one dares to leave the cockpit. They know he might still be holding a bomb. Any sudden move could be disastrous. The weather worsens. The sky is pitch black. Rain lashes against the fuselage. The wind howls through the open staircase at the back of the aircraft. And somewhere in that storm, Cooper is making his final preparations. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the crew feels a sudden bump, a sharp upward movement of the tail. The weight distribution has changed. Something or someone has just left the plane. Down below, there is nothing but endless forest, rugged mountains, and freezing rivers. The temperature is near freezing. The winds are violent. There are no lights, no towns, no roads, only wilderness. Under these conditions, jumping from a plane is essentially suicide. But Cooper does it without hesitation. He vanishes into the night. The crew continues flying toward Reno as planned. They land safely at 10:15 p.m. The FBI and local police swarm the aircraft immediately. They search every inch of the cabin. Cooper is gone. All that remains are a few clues. His black tie, left behind on his seat, 2 of the 4 parachutes, and several fingerprints on the tray table and armrests. All that remains are a few clues. His black tie, left behind on his seat, 2 of the 4 parachutes, and several fingerprints on the tray table and armrests. By morning, the story explodes across the country. Newspapers call it the most daring skyjacking in American history. A mysterious man hijacks a plane, collects $200,000, and leaps into the storm, never to be found again. People are fascinated. Some call him a genius, others a madman. But everyone is asking the same question. Who was D.B. Cooper? And how could he possibly have escaped? For the FBI, this is the beginning of one of the longest and most frustrating investigations in their history. When Flight 305 lands in Reno on the night of November 21, 1971, dozens of FBI agents and police officers are already waiting. They rush aboard as soon as the plane stops. Every corner of the cabin is searched. Every seat cushion is flipped. Every crevice is checked. But Cooper is gone. All that remains are fragments of a mystery. On the seat where Cooper sat, investigators find a black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl-type pin, and a few fingerprints on the armrests and tray table. There are no parachutes left. He took one main parachute and one reserve with him. The other two remain on the plane. No note. No trace of the money. The most haunting part is how clean his disappearance seems. It's as if he walked off the plane mid-air and simply vanished into nothing. The FBI faces a nearly impossible task, finding Cooper in the vast wilderness below. They have only rough estimates of the flight path, altitude, and timing of the jump. Cooper jumped at night, during a storm, over a remote region of southwestern Washington state, a place filled with thick forests, rugged terrain, and icy rivers. The search area covers dozens of square miles. The U.S. Army, National Guard, local law enforcement, and volunteers join forces. Helicopters scan the landscape. Boats comb the rivers. Teams on foot sweep through the woods, searching for any sign of a parachute, clothing, or money. They find nothing. The terrain Cooper chose to jump into is unforgiving. At the time of his leap, the temperature on the ground was near freezing, and strong winds gusted through the trees. Heavy rain made visibility almost zero. Experts tell the FBI that if Cooper didn't land perfectly, his chances of survival were slim. A parachute caught in the trees, a landing in a river, or simply the shock of the freezing water could have killed him instantly. And even if he survived the landing, he would have been stranded in the wilderness in the dark, wearing only a business suit and loafers. But despite the odds, the FBI can't find a body, a parachute, or even a shred of fabric. One of the FBI's smartest moves is tracking the serial numbers of the ransom money. Before handing the cash to Cooper, agents photographed and recorded each of the $10,020 bills. They send the list to banks, casinos, racetracks, and businesses across the country. If Cooper or anyone else tries to spend the money, it will trigger an alert. For months and then years, they watch for any of those bills to reappear. Nothing happens. It's as if the money itself has disappeared along with him. Within days, the FBI compiles a list of potential suspects. The first is, of course, Dan Cooper, the name on the ticket. But this leads nowhere. The name is fake. Then, through a strange misunderstanding by the press, the hijacker becomes known as D.B. Cooper. A reporter confused him with a man in Portland named D.B. Cooper, who was briefly questioned and cleared. But the name sticks, and soon the entire country is calling the mystery man by the wrong initials. The FBI begins to focus on people with skydiving experience, military backgrounds, or aviation knowledge. Cooper's calm behavior and precise flight instructions make it clear. He's not just some amateur. Investigators debate who Cooper really is. Some agents believe he might be a current or former airline employee, someone who knows the Boeing 727 well. Others think he could be an experienced paratrooper or ex-military. The fact that he knew about the rear staircase on the Boeing 727 is a huge clue. Almost no regular passengers even know it exists, but it can be deployed mid-flight, allowing someone to jump out the back. This method is so effective that after the hijacking, airlines install special Cooper vanes on planes to prevent the staircase from being opened during flight. Whoever he was, he knew this trick before anyone else. As the manhunt grows, so does media coverage. Every newspaper and TV station in America covers the story. It becomes a national obsession. Illustrations of Cooper's face, calm, wearing sunglasses, appear everywhere. Sketch artists produce the now iconic composite portrait. The public is captivated by this mysterious figure who managed to outsmart the authorities, jump into a storm, and disappear with $200,000. Some admire him. Some fear him. But everyone wants to know, where is D.B. Cooper? Weeks pass. Then months. Winter settles over the Pacific Northwest. The FBI keeps searching. But they're left with nothing more than a tie, some fingerprints, and a plane full of questions. Cooper left no accomplices, no clear motive, and no trail. The investigation will soon become the longest manhunt in FBI history. And over time, the mystery will only deepen. As weeks turned into months, the FBI began building an ever-growing list of suspects. At first, agents hoped the mystery man would reveal himself by spending the money or bragging to someone. But no money surfaced, and no one credible came forward. As weeks turned into months, the FBI began building an ever-growing list of suspects. At first, agents hoped the mystery man would reveal himself by spending the money or bragging to someone. But no money surfaced, and no one credible came forward. The earliest suspects were paratroopers, pilots, and airline employees. Cooper's knowledge of the Boeing 727 and his calm demeanor convinced agents that he probably wasn't just some random criminal. He knew exactly how to keep the plane flying low and slow. He knew about the rear staircase. He also brought a black tie, cheap sunglasses, and a suit, the perfect disguise to blend in. The FBI checked hundreds of military records for anyone with skydiving experience who matched Cooper's description. Mid-40s, around 6 feet tall, 170 to 180 pounds, well-spoken, and chain-smoking. They interviewed pilots, flight instructors, and ex-military personnel. Many were quickly ruled out, but a few stood out. One of the most famous suspects emerged years later. In 1995, a woman named Jo Weber claimed that her husband, Dwayne Weber, confessed on his deathbed, "I'm Dan Cooper." After his death, she searched through his belongings and found strange clues. He had an old Northwest Orient Airlines ticket. He kept a diary with references to the buried money. And she remembered that he once injured his knee from jumping out of a plane. The FBI investigated him, but handwriting samples didn't match. No solid evidence linked him to the case. Still, Dwayne Weber remains one of the more compelling late suspects, mostly because of that eerie confession. Another strong suspect was Richard McCoy, a former Army Green Beret and experienced skydiver. In April 1972, just a few months after the Cooper hijacking, McCoy hijacked another Boeing 727 in almost the exact same way. He demanded $500,000, got the cash, parachutes, and jumped out the back of the plane. Unlike Cooper, McCoy was caught 2 days later. He was convicted and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Some FBI agents believed McCoy might actually be Cooper. The methods were nearly identical. But there were problems. McCoy was much younger than Cooper, and the physical descriptions didn't match. The FBI eventually ruled him out, but the similarities fueled endless debates. One of the most intriguing suspects was Kenneth Christensen, a quiet man who worked as a flight attendant and later a mechanic for Northwest Orient Airlines, the same company Cooper hijacked. He fit the description. He had aviation knowledge. He suddenly started spending more money after 1971. And perhaps most suspicious of all, he allegedly made a cryptic deathbed remark to his brother, saying, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you." An independent investigator even claimed Christensen looked strikingly similar to the FBI sketch. The FBI examined him seriously, but eventually dismissed him for lack of hard evidence. Still, many Cooper enthusiasts believe Kenneth Christensen was the hijacker, using his insider knowledge to pull off the perfect escape. Another popular suspect is William Gossett, a decorated World War II and Korean War veteran. He was a skilled paratrooper and survivalist, known for his love of mystery stories. Later in life, Gossett allegedly told his family, "I'm Dan Cooper." He also reportedly showed them bundles of old cash and insisted they keep his secret. But no money ever surfaced, and the FBI couldn't prove any connection. Like many suspects, his story relies mostly on rumors and family claims. As the suspect list grew, so did the theories. Some believe Cooper was a disgruntled airline employee seeking revenge. Others thought he was a Vietnam veteran with a perfect combination of skydiving and aviation knowledge. Some even believed he might have been a Canadian, inspired by a French-language comic book character named Dan Cooper, a daring pilot who often performed parachute jumps. The theories became wilder over time. A few conspiracy theorists claimed Cooper never jumped at all, that he somehow slipped away during landing or had help on the ground. Others argued he died during the jump and his body was never found. But through it all, the FBI stuck to one idea. Cooper was most likely an experienced jumper who planned this meticulously and executed it alone. The D.B. Cooper case captured the public imagination like no other. It had everything: mystery, danger, a clever criminal, and a dramatic escape. For years, TV shows, magazines, and newspapers revisited the case, interviewing experts, analyzing evidence, and debating suspects. By the late 1970s, Cooper had become a folk legend. Some saw him as a modern-day Robin Hood, others as a ghost who slipped through the fingers of justice. But no matter how many suspects the FBI investigated, the same problem always remained. No one could prove anything. There was no DNA, no money trail, no confession that held up under scrutiny. By the end of the 1970s, the FBI had interviewed more than 800 suspects. Dozens were cleared through alibis, fingerprints, or physical mismatches. A few lingered as maybe candidates, but none gave investigators the smoking gun they needed. The case began to cool. But Cooper's name never disappeared from headlines. And then, nearly a decade after the hijacking, something unexpected turned up, a discovery that would breathe new life into the mystery. For nearly a decade, the FBI's Cooper investigation went cold. No suspects were ever proven guilty. No money turned up in circulation. And no physical evidence surfaced in the wilderness. The case seemed destined to fade into legend. But in February 1980, a discovery on the banks of the Columbia River changed everything. A family from Vancouver, Washington, was having a picnic near a sandy stretch of the Columbia River called Tennebar. 8-year-old Brian Ingram was digging in the sand when his shovel hit something unusual. He unearthed 3 bundles of old $20 bills, still wrapped in their original rubber bands, decayed but intact. The total amount was $5,800. The serial numbers on the bills were checked. They matched the ransom money given to D.B. Cooper almost 9 years earlier. It was the first and only confirmed piece of Cooper's ransom money ever found. The location of the discovery baffled investigators. Tennebar was about 30 kilometers downstream from Cooper's suspected jump zone. The money was buried under several inches of sand, partially deteriorated, but clearly planted there long after the hijacking. Experts believed the rubber bands could not have survived 9 years exposed to the elements, which suggested the money ended up there years after Cooper's jump. This discovery raised more questions than answers. Did Cooper bury the money himself? Did it wash up from the river and get trapped in the sandbar naturally? Or did someone else find the money first and hide it there? No one could prove anything. The discovery reignited public interest. Some investigators believed the money proved Cooper didn't survive the jump. They theorized his body and the ransom landed in the river, and part of the cash eventually floated downstream and got buried in the sand. Others argued the opposite, that Cooper survived, buried part of the money to mislead investigators, and disappeared with the rest. The strange state of the bills made both theories possible. FBI hydrologists even studied river currents, tides, and erosion patterns to figure out how the money could have ended up at Tennebar. After months of analysis, the answer was nobody knows. With the discovery of the money, the FBI launched a new wave of searches in the surrounding area. Teams of divers combed the Columbia River. Metal detectors scanned every inch of the sandbar. Searchers dug deep into the riverbank looking for more bills, a parachute, or even Cooper's remains. They found nothing else. It was as if Cooper had buried those 3 bundles there just to taunt them. Meanwhile, forensic experts re-examined Cooper's tie, which he had left behind on his seat. Under a microscope, they discovered microscopic particles of titanium embedded in the fabric. Titanium was rare in 1971. Only a few industries used it, specifically aerospace manufacturing. This discovery suggested Cooper might have worked in the aircraft industry, possibly as an engineer or factory worker. It was a fascinating lead, but without a suspect to match, the clue went nowhere. Over the years, strange pieces of evidence kept appearing. Hikers claimed to find rotting parachutes in the woods, but none matched Cooper's. People came forward with found money stories, but the serial numbers never matched the ransom list. Psychics and amateur detectives flooded the FBI with theories, some sincere, some ridiculous. One person even claimed Cooper was their long-lost uncle who disappeared every Thanksgiving to go flying. None of it panned out. By the 1980s, the D.B. Cooper case had taken on a life of its own. It was more than just a hijacking investigation now. It was a cultural phenomenon. Books were written. TV specials aired. Amateur sleuths devoted their lives to solving it. And for every new piece of evidence, 10 new theories appeared. Some believed Cooper drowned. Some believed he escaped to South America. Others believed he changed his identity and lived quietly in the American Northwest, blending in for the rest of his life. The truth was nobody knew. But one thing was clear. Cooper's story had become a puzzle that obsessed the nation. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, the FBI had spent thousands of hours and millions of dollars investigating the case. Agents came and went. New technologies like DNA testing were introduced. But the result remained the same. No Cooper, no clear answers. The money at Tenabar was both a clue and a curse. It reignited hope, but it didn't bring them any closer to the man who had vanished into the night. By the 1990s, the D.B. Cooper case had already become the longest and most exhaustive manhunt in FBI history. For 2 decades, agents had chased thousands of leads, interrogated hundreds of suspects, and analyzed every piece of evidence imaginable. Yet, the truth remained just out of reach. And as the 21st century approached, new technology and fresh eyes promised to finally crack the mystery. But Cooper remained a ghost. In 2001, the FBI revealed that it had extracted a partial DNA profile from Cooper's black clip-on tie, the one he left behind on his seat after the jump. Forensic teams carefully lifted DNA from skin cells trapped in the fabric. This gave investigators a modern tool they had never had before: the ability to compare potential suspects using genetic evidence. Unfortunately, the DNA was only partial, meaning it couldn't be used to definitively identify anyone. But it could rule suspects out, and over the next decade, the FBI would do exactly that. Several high-profile suspects were tested against the DNA. None matched. The hope of a smoking gun faded again. In the 2000s and 2010s, something unexpected happened. The D.B. Cooper case found new life online. Amateur investigators, historians, and conspiracy theorists formed online forums dedicated to solving the mystery. They analyzed flight paths, studied weather records from the night of the jump, and debated endlessly over Cooper's possible identity. Some even conducted their own field expeditions, hiking into the wilderness of Washington state to look for parachutes, buried money, or any trace of the hijacker. Dozens of podcasts, documentaries, and YouTube channels emerged, each with their own definitive theory about who Cooper was. The internet had turned Cooper into more than just a criminal. He had become a legend to be solved. As public interest surged, new suspects kept appearing, even decades after the crime. Some were brought forward by relatives who believed a family member had lived a double life. Others were uncovered by journalists or amateur sleuths digging through archives. One particularly intriguing modern suspect was Robert Rackstraw, a former Army pilot with a history of fraud and a suspicious resemblance to the Cooper sketch. Journalists and investigators spent years building a case against him, claiming his military background, intelligence skills, and cryptic letters pointed directly to him. Rackstraw denied everything. The FBI investigated, but never officially named him as Cooper. When Rackstraw died in 2019, many believed the secret died with him. In July 2016, after 45 years of investigation, the FBI made a surprising announcement. They were officially closing the D.B. Cooper case. Their statement explained that they needed to redirect resources to more urgent cases, and that after decades of investigation, they believed Cooper likely did not survive the jump. Still, they admitted there was no definitive proof, and that the case would remain technically unsolved. For many, it felt like the end of an era. But the mystery didn't end there. If anything, the FBI's closure only made people more determined to solve it on their own. Decades after that stormy night in 1971, people are still obsessed with D.B. Cooper. Why? Part of it is the perfect combination of elements. A mysterious man with no clear identity. A dramatic hijacking and mid-air escape. No bodies, no money trail, no resolution. It's a story that feels almost cinematic, but it's real. Cooper didn't just rob a plane. He outsmarted the system at a time when airline security was virtually non-existent. He humiliated the FBI on a national stage and disappeared into thin air. That kind of story doesn't fade. It becomes legend. Today, most experts fall into one of two camps. Keycap 1 Cooper died during the jump. They argue that the weather, terrain, and lack of equipment made survival nearly impossible. The buried money antenna bar supports the idea that the ransom was scattered by the river after Cooper's death. Cooper survived and disappeared. This theory suggests Cooper was skilled enough to land safely, hide the money, and start a new life under a different identity. Supporters point to the clean escape, the lack of a body, and the enduring mystery of the ransom bills. Some even believe Cooper was part of a larger conspiracy, involving insiders at the airline or accomplices on the ground. But after so many decades, it's difficult to separate fact from myth. More than 50 years later, the D.B. Cooper case remains one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. The FBI may have closed its file, but the story continues to captivate new generations. Every year, tourists, adventurers, and amateur detectives travel to the Pacific Northwest, hoping to find that one missing clue. TV shows revisit the case. Podcasts analyze every shred of evidence. And YouTube videos about Cooper reach millions of curious viewers. Cooper himself, whether he died that night or lived on, has become an American icon, representing the ultimate mystery. A man who jumped into the darkness and was never seen again.